Now, when we tap on this picker, we should see the list of items. To implement this, we should give our app picker a list of objects to render in its modal. So here in app.js, outside of our function component, I'm going to define an array of objects called categories. This is purely for testing. We're going to throw away this code very soon. So let's add an object here. Let's assume that every object in this array should have at least two properties. A label that we display to the user, like furniture, and a value that we use under the hood, like when we call the server. So here we use a numeric value. Now let's duplicate this and change the value and label for each item. I'm going to call the second item clothing and the third one cameras. Now we should pass the categories to our app picker. So we give it a new prop, items, and set it to categories. Now let's go ahead and implement this. So here in app picker, I'm going to add a new prop here, items. And by the way, it's a good practice to sort these props. This makes our code a little bit cleaner and more readable. So I'm going to add items right here, so we have a proper order. Also, right now we don't need other props because it's grayed out. So let's delete it and clean up our code. So we have the items prop. Now, here's our modal. We should render the items in a flat list. So right after the button, let's add a flat list. Once again, we have two implementations, one in React Native gesture handler, the other in React Native. So let's import that. Now here we should set three props. Do you remember? The first one is data, which we set to items. The second one is key extractor. We set this to a function for uniquely identifying each object. So item goes to item.value. This returns a number, so we have to convert it to a string. And finally, we set render item to a function. As I told you before, this function has an argument. We destructure it right away and pick the item property. Now, what should we render here? Well, we don't really have a proper component for this purpose, so I'm going to create a new component. Let's add a new file called picker item.js. Now we create a component. We should be able to tap on this item. So let's start with the touchable component. Here I'm going to use touchable opacity. Now inside this, we're going to add an app text. Now we need to render the label here. We should get it as a prop. So let's destructure this argument and get the label to render it right here. Next, we should handle the onPress event. Now, what should we write here? Well, we want this component to be reusable. So what should happen when we tap an item should be decided by the consumer of this component, not here. So we need a second prop called onPress. And here we simply delegate to the function that is passed from the outside. Okay, save. Now back to our app picker. Let's finish rendering an item. So here we render our picker item component. Here we should set the label. So I set the label to item.label. We should also handle the onPress event. For now, let's just log something on the console. So I'm going to log the item that we're rendering. Okay. Now let's test our implementation. So we tap on this. We have the list of items. We did some styling. We're going to get back to this in a second. But let's test the tapping. So tap. And here's the item that I tapped on. Beautiful. Now let's fix the styling issue. So back to the picker item component. I just noticed that this touchable opacity is imported from React Native gesture handler. I'm not familiar with this. So let's use the one defined in React Native. We should also import the style sheet module. Here we create our style object. For our text, let's give it a padding of 20 pixels. And then we set style to styles.text. Let's test our implementation. So tab. Okay, we have some spacing. Looks good. So now when we select an item, this modal should be closed and the currently selected item should be displayed in the picker. We'll do that next.